You're listening to the Men's Dating Mastery Podcast with host Alec Chase, bringing you the experts in dating, sex, and relationships.
Hello, guys, and welcome to episode 19 of the MDM Podcast. Today, we're tackling what I believe to be one of the most difficult topics, breakups. Whether you're on the receiving end or the one ending a relationship, breakups are a very tricky thing to navigate and recover from. So it is very fitting that my guest today is the lovely Laura Yates, who's a dating and relationship coach who happens to also specialize in helping men recover from breakups. In this conversation, we talk about the most common issues that men deal with when it comes to breakups, effective ways to recover from one, why seeking closure is just an excuse to try and keep your ex in your life, dealing with feelings of inadequacy, why a woman might break up with you in order to get your attention rather than to actually end the relationship, how to identify if the problem that led to the breakup truly lies with you and what to do about it, why some guys come across as boring and how to fix it, and the best way to end the relationship if you're the one doing the breaking up. Hope you enjoy the interview. On a separate note, if you have been keeping up with the podcast, then you already know that one of my guests, Frank Kermit, has been kind enough to give away 3 of his products for free to you, the listeners of MDM. These products are an ebook called The Emotional Needs of Women, a 3-set audio program called The Art of Charisma, from Creepy to Charisma, and another 5-set audio program called Pimping Your Pad. These are serious, in-depth products that normally go for $270. Frank was generous enough to give them away for free in order to encourage you to keep listening to the show. To get them, all you need to do is go to the show notes for episode 14 called Using Body Language to Create Attraction with Patty Contenta, or episodes 15 and 16, which are parts 1 and 2 of my interview with Frank Kermit called The 10 Emotional Needs of Women. You can find all 3 of these pages by going to the podcast page on mensdatingmastery.com and scrolling through the list. Once you're there, just click on the link under the title Free Giveaway at the top of any of the 3 pages to get the downloads. Like I said, these products represent $270 in value, which is why they will be available only until September 16th of 2015. After that, the only way to get them will be to buy them just like everybody else. So get them while they are still free. Now on to the interview. Hey Laura, thanks for being with me.
Thank you very much for having me, Alec. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So can you kick us off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Laura Yates. I'm from the UK, and I coach people, mainly guys actually now, all around the areas of breakups, getting over breakups, getting back into dating, elements around attraction, and ultimately helping guys use these experiences as a catalyst for positive change in their entire lifestyle.
You know, the first time I heard about what you do, it took me a little bit by surprise because I know you didn't really set out to coach men specifically, but they started reaching out to you, and particularly in the area of seeking help with breakups. And this is not something that guys are known to seek help with. So I'd like to ask you, in your experience, what are some of the common issues that men specifically are facing when they're dealing with a breakup?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I notice most is that men really tend to push their feelings down, which, I think is why when they come to me, there's this real overspill of stuff that has come to the surface that they just don't really know how to deal with. I think men can feel a lot of pressure to have to be able to deal with all of these things in the most, manly or masculine way possible. And they think that means by coping with it, by, ignoring their emotions, pushing them down and forcing themselves to believe that they're actually getting on with things. But in fact, that's when all of these, negative beliefs and patterns can start to form. So, perhaps they immediately start getting into dating, and then the realization of where that might go with someone might be too much for them to handle. So they back off completely and disappear, or they get this idea that they're bad for the other person and push them away, or that, they can go completely to the other end of the scale and get too clingy too soon. And they notice that these are things that are happening to them over and over again, and they don't understand why. And really that's because they haven't really dealt with all of those emotions that they've pushed down. So that's what I really love to work with guys on, taking a few steps back to figure out why that's happening and what thought processes need to change, what they need to do to change in order to overcome that stuff.
It's funny how as guys, we are very much prone to doing that. If we've got feelings that we don't like or that make us feel uncomfortable, our instinctual reaction is to just push them away. And, what I've learned, and this has to do with emotions as well as just about any other challenge in life, until you acknowledge it and face it head on, it will continue to show up for you over and over and over again.
Absolutely. And the thing is, these things, I think they don't change unless we do face those head on and, recognize what we need to change in order to, not have those things keep coming up again and again. So, And so I think that's a really big thing for guys. And I really admire the guys who come to work with me because they are ready to make that change. So actually the process of working with them is very enjoyable.
Yeah. Well, as a guy, I know that you might feel like you're being vulnerable and possibly even demonstrating a certain weakness when you go and seek out help like this. But in reality, I think it actually shows a lot of strength to be able to acknowledge that, this is an issue that's hurting me, and having the courage to deal with it rather than just hiding from it.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. You're right. So many guys, when they come, they do feel almost a little bit embarrassed about having to come to a coach or, coming to someone like me for help. And what I really like to do as well is really turn that around for them and make them realize, actually, this shows incredible strength of character. And ultimately, when you come out of this, you're going to be way above a lot of other guys. You're going to have so much more emotional awareness, which is going to set you up so much better to be going into future relationships.
Absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned when you were describing the issues that guys tend to have around breakups is feeling like maybe they weren't good enough or they weren't the right match for whoever it is that they were with. And I've read in one of your articles, and I'll quote you directly, you said, if you're not the right match for them, they're not the right match for you. Can you elaborate on that statement?
Definitely. I mean, I think that statement does make it sound a lot easier than what it is to actually face up to. But I think, and this is the same for men and women, I think, for a relationship to evolve, it needs the two people in it to more or less be on the same page about wanting that and having more or less the same vision of where it's going. Each person will likely have their own insecurities or uncertainties about it. But if you are in a dating situation or even in a relationship, and one person has made it clear that their intentions about where it's going are different to yours, then you really have to accept that. And it might just be a case that they're not the right match for you right now, but that's really their job to figure out, not yours. And I think, I see a lot of times, it's people really trying to, they'll perhaps lower their standards to accommodate that. And it's never healthy to try and overly pursue or talk the other person into being with you, especially if they have really made it clear or are very clearly giving you those signs. Ultimately, if they're showing you or saying to you that it's not what they want, then that's not really going to work for you either. And it's really harsh to accept that, but we often try and fight so hard against that, but that's kind of the way it is. So I think the right match is where the feelings and the actions and the intentions are reciprocated. So not where one person is fighting to make the other person like them more or compromising or trying to change who they are, because that just then ends up in more heartache and drama in the long run. So I hope that, that explains what I meant by that a little bit more.
Yeah, it reminds me of a statement that I really like. I forget who the original person who said it is. A lot of people quoted it. It may have been Matthew Hussey, but he said, men like women who like men. And conversely, women like men who like women. And to me, it kind of goes along the same lines of it has to be mutual. If they're not into you, chances are that you shouldn't be into them either.
Exactly. And like I said before, sometimes it is purely just down to timing, and you can have those situations where, you do your dating or whatever, and then one person, they say it's, oh, this isn't right for me, and you do walk away, and then they realise that actually, they were wrong about that, and that's different. But I think if you try and overly pursue it, or really try and force someone to like you, and you really put a lot of effort and intention into that, that's the outcome is never going to be good, because ultimately it should be a two-way thing.
Here's something that I take a lot of interest in. This is the whole idea of closure. And you stated in one of your articles, again, I'm going to quote you directly in this one also. It really, really captured my attention. You said, getting closure from an ex is an excuse to not let go. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Yes. And believe me, I speak from experience on this one. So I think often we use this idea of getting closure as an excuse to get closer to the person. I mean, when your ex is still in your life, you will not be able to let go of them. It's impossible. There are still so many feelings attached. And I think often we use this thing of needing questions answered as an excuse to keep that contact going. But realistically, even if you prolong that and you have these conversations after the breakup, those questions will likely lead to more questions, or you might not hear what you want to hear. And I think in most cases, not all, because I think it is different if there are children involved or something. But in most cases, the closure is the end of the relationship, because, I mean, as we said before, if it's not right for one person, then it's not right for the other. But because we find it so hard to let go of that, we can use this idea of wanting to get closure as our way of keeping our exes in the picture, even though we're not perhaps aware of that. So I think, if you are considering breaking up with someone, when you're doing that, I think you really need to keep in mind of making sure that you are addressing all of those potential questions that could come up, so that there isn't anything like left hugely unanswered. So yeah, I think that's sort of the way I can describe what I meant by that. What do you think?
It reminds me of a personal experience I had. And this is the only time I had any kind of issues with this whole concept of closure. This was probably the first person that I treated as a very serious relationship and as a potential life partner. And I ultimately chose to end the relationship. And although the decision was mine, it was still painful. And what shocked me is that I went into that conversation expecting to have a lot of questions to answer and a lot of things to flush out. And in a way, I was kind of looking forward to it. And in response, the girl I was breaking up with said nothing. I mean, literally, I don't think she said a word at all.
Ah, interesting.
And it just ate away from me for months because, like I said, as much as it was my decision, I was still very much attached to her, and there were a lot of feelings involved. And this was the first person that I truly tried to build something with. And so I felt like I didn't have closure, and it used to bother me for months. And ultimately what helped me get over it was understanding that, this was not the person for me to begin with. I knew that. I made that decision rather than trying to answer 1,000,001 questions, which are likely to lead to another 1,000,001 questions to the power of 10. Maybe I should just accept the fact that this is the situation, that I can't change the situation, and to look forward to the future. And, it's easier said than done, but after a while, I came to accept it. And that's what ultimately allowed me to just forget about it and move on, take the lessons and not let it eat away at me anymore.
Oh, definitely. I think that situation can really throw you, like you say, you broke up with her and you probably anticipated all kinds of questions from her. But I think when that, that person just doesn't really volunteer any questions, it puts a doubt in your mind about whether that's what they wanted, and it makes you question yourself. But she was probably dealing with that in her own way, and she probably had lots of her own questions, but perhaps she just didn't know how to broach it with you. But yeah, I think you're right. Ultimately, if you knew that relationship wasn't right, there was obviously something in you that made you end the relationship, then that's what you really have to keep hold of. And I think if you are struggling with the end of a relationship, it's about going back to all of those things that you knew weren't working. I'm not saying look at it from a very negative point of view, but I think when we're struggling to deal with a relationship breakdown, we tend to really focus on the positives and actually build them up even more, so that we're painting this quite unrealistic picture of what the relationship was actually like, and we're failing to see the things that were going wrong as well. So, when working with people, I do encourage them to really come back to all of those things that they know weren't working, that they know that they weren't getting from the relationship. And sometimes that can help you get that perspective back.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. In my experience, and I didn't have a coach teach me this, I learned it probably the way most people do it, through just making mistakes and trial and error.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Yeah. But yeah, I came to the realization that when you find yourself reminiscing over something that's over and possibly regretting it or feeling down about it, it helps to think about the things that are wrong with it. And again, not in the way that'll just send you further down the rabbit hole, but just in order to give you a very clear and rational perspective. You know what? These are the issues that were there. And so maybe the breakup makes a lot of sense and is for the best.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely agree with that.
So continuing along the same topic of closure, you said something along the lines of that closure is something you may want, but you don't necessarily need the involvement of the other person. Closure is something that you can get on your own. Can you explain how that is possible and what some of the strategies that you recommend for getting that closure on your own?
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to what we've just spoke about there, really. But I think often the person who wants the closure is the person who has been finished with. I mean, I know your case, you were illustrating something a bit different there. But usually the person that's seeking that closure, they're the one who has been finished with. And usually the person ending the relationship, that for them is the closure. So they've kind of already closed it. And as hard as it is, the other person can either cling on to this idea of needing more and more closure from the other person, and as you say, really going down that rabbit hole and ultimately prolonging the whole thing, or they can take a step back and say to themselves that, well, as tough as this is, and it is tough, it's really hard, that other person is now moving on as this relationship isn't right for them. So the best thing that I can do is bit by bit begin to move on myself. And it's literally taking it day by day. Because if it's not right for them, then ultimately it's not right for you either. And then it can get complicated because sometimes even the person who has ended the relationship might have second thoughts and might start to get back in contact, which is really then difficult for the other person to handle. So this is why, before you break up with someone, you really need to make sure that breaking up is what you want. Because, I mean, what I see a lot and what I've experienced, and just from, observing my friends' relationships, sometimes people break up with someone because they want to get a reaction. It's not actually what they want, but they've just been driven to such a point that they think that the breaking up is the extreme that they'll go to get a reaction from the other person. And once you go down that road, things get very, very messy and confusing. So I think if you are going to be, you're considering breaking up with someone, you really need to make sure that it is 100% what you want.
Okay, well, you actually said a couple of really interesting things that I'd like to explore a little bit further with you. So first, on what you just said about a person breaking up with you, not so much to break up with you, but rather to get a reaction out of you. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What might motivate a person to do something like that, and what might they hope to get out of it?
Yeah, I think sometimes, this can be quite common in women, actually. Maybe they feel, that their relationship has got to a point where they feel very, they don't feel that they're getting the respect they deserve. They're really trying, and it's not being reciprocated from the other person. And they're really trying to make the other person see what is at stake, of losing them. And if they're not getting what they need, sometimes people can go to the extreme of, they kind of break down over it, as opposed to really wanting to break up. And that's the extreme that they will go to, just purely to make the other person see, like, look, for me, it has got to this stage. Please, can you notice me? Please, can you notice what I need? So I think that's what I mean by that.
And is that more of just, I guess, emotional I'm not going to say breakdown, but exasperation. Just, I don't know what else to do. And so this is just an emotional reaction that a woman might be having? Or is it more of, I hate to call it this, but more of a strategic move, like more of a tactic in order to very consciously elicit a certain response?
So yeah, I don't think it's strategic as such. I think it's sometimes people are just more, it can usually be due down to lack of communication. So perhaps they have been, one person has been expressing that they're unhappy in the relationship or that they need something to change, and they've been trying to express that over and over, and the other person isn't listening. So the threat of a breakup is really trying to get the other person to listen and really, trying to be heard.
Right. I'd like to go back to something else you said. If somebody dumps a person, there's situations where they might actually themselves start to reinitiate contact with the person they broke up with. How would you recommend a person handle that situation? So say, for example, I'm with a girlfriend, she broke up with me, I'm moving on, all of a sudden I start getting text messages or phone calls or emails from her. What's the best way for me to respond or not respond perhaps in a situation like that?
I think you need to be quite bold in the fact that you need to communicate with her that you need your space. This is your time now to be doing your own thing and to be moving on, and for her to respect that. I think don't ignore it immediately. Because that can happen a lot. We all slip up and send the odd text message when we're missing the person, and it's that's not always manipulative or anything like that. It can just be just a natural reaction when we're missing someone. So I think it's important to honour that, but just do it in a way that is being very bold about what you need and not being afraid to communicate that.
Okay, got you. And it sounds like you're coming from the perspective of assuming that the person doesn't, or in this case, I'm using myself as an example, assuming I don't want to resume that relationship.
I think so, but I think even if you are you are considering resuming the relationship, I think it's really important that the two people need that time apart, because there can be many situations where you break up and then get back together and the relationship's great and it flourishes. But I think in order for that to happen, you both need your time and space to be able to reflect on the reality of the relationship, and perhaps what needs to change and what things need to be improved upon within the relationship coming from each person. I think a lot of the time, but this is where couples, they break up, they get back together, they break up, they get back together, and nothing changes because they don't actually have that time apart. They don't get that physical or emotional distance. I think you really need that in order to have clarity. So yeah, even if perhaps you are considering rekindling a relationship, I think you still need that space, and you still need to communicate that to the other person.
Right. I'm just curious, in all the guys that you work with on this particular issue of breakups, have you seen many of them getting back together with their girlfriends post breakup?
No, no, usually, because how I like to work with guys particularly is really taking a step back from the actual relationship itself and really working on the lifestyle stuff. And I worked with quite a few guys who've come out of very, very long-term relationships, actually, and that's where I think you can get into patterns and habits, and you can tend to let go of a lot of the things, your passions and your interests, and your social group. And so when I work with guys, I really like to bring all of that stuff back into their lives. So, we're introducing those passions and those interests, and we're building those social circles. And what they tend to find is that their lives get so much more fulfilled and filled up with different things and new experiences, that they're realizing that perhaps they stayed in that relationship because it was comfortable, and then they don't want to go back to that. So that's usually the case, because I think these things are opportunities for personal growth. They are an opportunity to really reassess what you want out of life, what you want out of a partner. And relationships can often be journeys. I know some are bad, some are good, but ultimately you should learn something from each one, I think. And so that's what I see with a lot of guys, is that they kind of get their life back on track, and they're introducing all new things into their life, and then that gives them a whole new perspective on actually what they want in a partner and what they want in a relationship.
Right. Here's a question, and it might actually have a similar answer. I'm curious to know if it does. But I imagine one of the things that you must deal with quite a bit with guys is if a guy gets dumped, I imagine one of the most common sensations are feelings of inadequacy. So
Yeah.
what is a good way for men to overcome this blow to their self-esteem?
Yeah, I think what you need to do is start to re-engage with things that make you feel good. Remind yourself of all the things that you can do that make you feel good that perhaps you lost sight of whilst in the relationship. So start to do things where you feel at your best. It's really important about who you're choosing to spend your time around as well during a time like that. So spend time around people who bring out the best in you, around good friends. And I think it's really important that it's not people who are going to encourage you to get too reckless. So who aren't going to be, wanting you to go out every single night, getting drunk and really talking badly of your ex and trying to push you towards new women. I mean, of course, you're going to have a blowout probably. Most people do that, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes you do need that to let your hair down a little bit. But I think it's just being conscious that you're not looking to that, using that as a crutch to get through it. So what I work a lot with guys is focusing more on your lifestyle and health. It's just really bringing it back to basics in the sense of making sure that you're eating well, that you're working out and sleeping, because it's amazing how when you feel good in yourself health wise, even if you are going through emotional crap, really, you feel more confident, you look better, and you feel more energized. So things like turning to alcohol too much. I mean, alcohol is a depressant ultimately. So if you start to rely on it too much to build your confidence, that's really then just going to end up making you feel and look worse and perhaps not making the best decisions. So for guys particularly, I'd say start really focusing on taking care of yourself, working out and just doing things that make you feel happy and that you enjoy, and ideally within social environments as well, so group sports or take a new class or just try something new. Really focus on that stuff as opposed to going straight back out there and trying to find someone else as a way to revalidate yourself or build your self-esteem.
I actually really like that answer. It's just always been instinctual for me, but I know that when I end a relationship, my first instinct is not to go and date someone new, but I usually focus a lot in my career, and I find myself in the gym a lot more. And it's always been an instinctual reaction for me, but I also felt that it was the one thing that helped me the most.
Definitely. I mean, I think it's much the same for women, actually. I mean, I know when I went through my last breakup, which was a particularly bad one for me, and actually the one that really inspired me to kind of go into this niche of coaching, I know that my go-to was, my work and getting in the gym and doing like new types of workouts in the gym. So it was about bringing in new goals, creating new memories for myself, and doing things that I didn't associate with my ex and our relationship, and just things that made me feel like I was accomplishing something as an individual.
I'd like to change directions a little bit and look at this notion of breakups, and particularly being the one broken up with, from a different perspective. So it's very common for us to pat the person who just got dumped on the back and console them and make them feel better and reassure them that they're good and worthwhile people. And, maybe the person that broke up with them is a jerk or whatever. But the reality is that's not always the case. There are people out there who can't hold a relationship, and the common denominator is them. Right. So yeah. I can't buy into this notion of everybody is this wonderful person and everybody deserves somebody. Some people suck. Now, that's not to say that they don't have the potential to be great people, but sometimes they're doing something wrong that's turning their partners off. And so how would you advise a person to go through the process of identifying whether they do, in fact, have something to improve in themselves? And then if they do come to the realization that, hey, maybe I could be better in one way or another, now how do they start going down that path of making those improvements?
I think that's a really important point, actually, that you've made there, because a lot of the time we can go into this real victim mentality of always blaming the other person. And, the thing about how I work is that I really don't like to create illusion about things like this. I'm not about, just be yourself and just continue to be yourself. Because, at the end of the day, if you keep getting, rejected or you keep getting broken up with, I mean, as you said, the common thing there is you. So instead of just blaming the other person, you really have to look at what your part in that is. You know, if you keep getting the same bit of feedback or similar pieces of feedback, you need to take note of that. And if you want to change the outcome, you have to change something. I mean, and that's the same with all parts of life, really, isn't it? So I think, first of all, it's about really looking at the reasons that you have been given. So, for example, perhaps, you know, people have told you that you come on too strong too soon. You know, if so, well, why is that? You know, what is missing in your life that you're placing so much emphasis on one person, and you're doing that with each person that you're dating or in a new relationship with? Or is it because you go hot and cold and the other person gets tired of that? I mean, maybe you get told, I mean, I've worked with a couple of guys and their feedback is that they're a bit boring, you know, in which case, what can you do to become more interesting? Because, you know, for women, that's really, really, really attractive. We're attracted to interesting guys. So when dealing with things like this, I mean, I really try and take the approach of being very realistic, but still sensitive towards it, because I mean, at the end of the day, no one is perfect, and I think we can all come out of relationships, no matter what side of it that you're on. There's all things that we can do to improve ourselves and to grow from it. So it's really about trying to turn it around and encouraging people to see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to make changes, to ultimately get the type of relationship that you want and that you deserve. But in order to get that, you need to become that person that's going to attract that.
Yeah, I always believe that if there's a very specific kind of woman that a man wants, then the best way to go about getting her is to first understand what qualities he's looking for, and then to ask himself, what kind of qualities would a woman like that want in a man? And then to ask yourself, do I have those qualities? And if not, what do I need to do to acquire them if this is something that I genuinely want?
Exactly. And I think a lot of the times where guys, I mean, and women, we get these, you know, ideas about, we get these negative attitudes about, so maybe a guy has a negative attitude towards a woman, but yet he's expecting to get this incredible driven woman who's very strong and independent. Yet, you know, it's becoming very apparent when he's trying to date those types of women that he's not actually able to handle that. So it is about thinking about, well, what type of woman do you want to attract, and therefore, yeah, what is she looking for in a guy? And so, you know, and can I become that, and is that the type of guy that I want to become? So it's really about kind of facing all of that stuff head on, I think, which can be quite hard. It can be really hard to look at your own flaws in the face, but you really need to be able to do that. And I think that's why sometimes working with a female coach like myself can help guys, because I'm able to provide that female perspective. And I do like to work with people very, very honestly, so they don't get it sugar coated.
So that's actually really good. And on the topic of getting that female perspective, as well as talking about qualities that guys might want to make sure they have, you mentioned something just a little bit earlier on. And that's the fact that a lot of the guys that come to you have received the feedback that they're a little bit boring. I don't think that's very uncommon. Let's talk about that a little bit. I don't want to take too much of a tangent with this one, but I think it's an important one. What is it that guys are doing or not doing that earns them that label of being a boring guy?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously, you know, I don't speak as, I'm not the voice of female, but I think in general, you know, women are attracted to guys who have got stuff going on in their lives. And so I think what can happen is men, especially if they get quite taken with a woman, they can, you know, lose sight of everything else that's going on in their life. So it becomes all about her. And you know, what they really need to be doing is still, you know, engaging in all of those things that made them, you know, made us attracted to them in the first place. So, you know, people, I mean, even if you're passionate about something, you don't have to have things going on in your life every single night, but you have to be passionate about something or be interested in something. So just making sure that you have got other things going on in your life, that you're kind of active socially, and because the more that you have going on, the more that when you are dating women, you're going to have so much more to talk about. You're going to be coming across as such a more dynamic type of person. And that's what we're really, really attracted to. We want someone who can kind of bring us into their world a little bit and show us new things. And even if it isn't things that the woman, it doesn't even have to be things that we have in common, but just seeing someone who's passionate about something, or who's really interested, or someone who's really going for their goals, that's really attractive.
Right. What that means to me is have a life outside of your relationship.
Definitely. Yeah.
And don't pin the quality of your life on the woman, because if you're doing that, then by default, you're not bringing anything to the table.
Yeah, definitely. And that can get quite draining. And it actually, the attraction just plummets when a woman kind of sees that start to appear in a guy. And it's the same the other way around, I think, as well. What do you think?
I agree wholeheartedly. On this podcast, I spent a lot of time talking about the differences between men and women and different emotional needs, and those differences do exist, particularly when it comes to emotional needs. But I also believe that a lot of the attraction factors that either attract or repel people are very similar. We talk on this podcast about needy men, how that's a turnoff to women, but needy women are a turnoff to men, and women that don't have stuff going on in their lives outside the relationship can also be boring, just like guys who don't. So I actually think there are a lot of commonalities, and those triggers are the same for both genders.
I agree. I don't think we're that different in that way, as men and women. And I see it a lot with women, just through clients and just through friends and observations, that we can get fixated on a guy so quickly, and then we can start to drop everything to be with him and make ourselves really available. And it's amazing how the attraction just completely disintegrates. And they can have been really, really into you, but as soon as you show those signs, the guy is just put off. And then he's off. He's gone off somewhere onto someone new, because it's we still like, as men and as women, we still like to feel, not that it's a game and it's about having a challenge, but it's when you are spending time around someone who's got lots going on, it's like you're not the only thing in their lives, and that is really attractive. So yeah, I don't think we're that different in that way.
So here's a question to start wrapping things up, and I want to again turn things around a little bit. We spent most of this conversation speaking about how to overcome a breakup when a guy's the one that's being broken up with. But what about a situation where a guy might want to end the relationship? This I find is very, very tricky. This is not something that we're taught how to do. That's something that most people do not do well. So do you have any tips about how a guy can go about ending a relationship, but in a way that's compassionate to the other person, preserves his own integrity, but still makes his position very, very clear, so there's no going back afterwards?
Yeah, it's never a nice position to be in, and I think as guys, it's really hard, because women are, well, generally we can be quite emotional, and I think for a guy to be in that position and to want to do it in a dignified way, I think it's hard. And I think my only advice for that is to really just be, to be honest, be calm, and be mindful of how she's going to feel. Most women, we do want a dignified way of being broken up with, so do it in a way that is respectful to her and to the relationship. But you have to be direct. So if you skirt around it and go around the houses too much, it just makes the whole thing of doing it even more of a challenge. And then you might talk yourself out of it as you're trying to have that conversation. So it really just needs to be said quite early on. And you really need to convey that you are serious about it, which is also why before you break up with them, you really need to make sure that it's absolutely what you want. And I think when you're having that conversation, just try and stay as calm as possible, and definitely don't go into attack mode or reel off a big list of why perhaps they're failing you. If this is the reason why you're ending it, perhaps she's doing something wrong, or you're not getting from something her that you need. But I think phrasing it more in a way that for you the relationship isn't right, that it's not evolving in a way that you want, and just make it very clear that it does make you sad. But that ultimately it's not right for you. And I think, I mean, that's all that you can really do. I think ideally you want to be able to leave, after the conversation as well, to give you both space and avoid the conversation going round and round in circles or end up in an argument. So think about where you do it too, and in an environment where she's going to feel comfortable and safe in. And I mean, I definitely wouldn't suggest asking her to come to yours, because you want to have control over when you leave. So I think, that's, just do it in a way that really is respectful and mindful of her and of the relationship as well.
All right. Those are good points, particularly about location. Just from experience, I know it can be challenging if you're doing the breaking up and you're doing it in your own home. It makes it very challenging to bring an end to that conversation.
Yeah, because she might not want to leave.
Yeah, but the thing that I personally found very tricky in past experiences when doing the breaking up is striking a balance between compassion and standing your ground in a very uncompromising way. Because on the one hand, this is someone you care about. Being broken up with is challenging. And so the girl you're breaking up with, you want to help her preserve her sense of self-worth as much as possible. But you don't want to do it in the way that you break up and then by the end of the conversation, you're back together. So I find that's a really tricky one to navigate, because I know in the past I've certainly been a little too withdrawn, and I've had to learn to become a little bit warmer and a little bit more expressive.
Yeah, I think as most women, they do really appreciate that. And if you can do it, I mean, and I guess from your side, that does show that you've got, real emotional awareness about this sort of stuff. I think it is tricky for guys to really hit that good balance. I mean, ultimately, there's never going to be an ideal way to break up with someone. That it's quite likely that the other person isn't going to feel good. So it's about not beating yourself up too much about that. Obviously you've got to be considerate and respectful and show some kind of compassion towards her, but you have to be you have to honor your own feelings as well. And I mean, as we were saying before, if this relationship isn't right for you, then it's not right for her either. And although you might not want to say that to her, but I think just not giving yourself too much of a hard time about hurting her feelings, or as long as you do it in a way that is respectful, that does show compassion, but that is firm and direct, that's really all you can do.
I think that's a perfect note to end it on. And I'm really glad that you said that, at the end of the day, breakups are breakups, and it's not going to be pleasant, and it's going to suck. And that's something that just needs to be accepted as part of reality.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough, but it's never going to be a nice thing to have to do. But ultimately, it will lead you hopefully on a better path, and her or him too.
So to conclude, if people wanted to learn more about you, how they can get help from you, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So they can find me on my website, which is laurayates.org. I'm on Twitter at Laura Yates UK, and people can also find me on Facebook, where I post quite a lot of stuff on articles and everything, laura.yates. So yeah, all quite self-explanatory and simple.
Perfect. And of course, as always, all of those links will be in the show notes on mensdatingmastery.com. Laura, thank you very much. Great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed this one.
Yeah, me too. Thanks so much for having me, Alec. I hope your listeners find it helpful.
That is it for this interview, guys. Don't forget that you can get Frank Kermit's 3 products, the Emotional Needs of Women ebook, the Art of Charisma from Creepy to Charisma 3-set audio program, and the Pimping Your Pad 5-set audio program by visiting the show notes for episodes 14, 15, or 16, all of which can be found on the podcast page at mensdatingmastery.com. Once you've found the show notes, click on the link under the title Free Giveaway at the top of the page to get the products. Remember that these products represent $270 in value and therefore will be available only until September 16th of 2015. So you only have a limited time to get them for free. After that, you'll have to shell out some money just like everybody else. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to Men's Dating Mastery, a podcast dedicated to improving the lives of men and the women around them.